this tension between what Assyriology has to say and one's belief in the text is not actually the main issue, because what Assyriology can do for Ezekiel can work for both Assyriologists and for, to be honest, biblical literalists. Knowing Akkadian, knowing Assyriology can help us understand the text better, not on Assyriology's terms, but on its own terms.
Wow.
Because Ezekiel was in Babylonia, and he was speaking with, by his own admission, he says this is where he is.
Hey everyone, this is What's Your Pastor and Celia Taon with student Eli Tadmor. We're going to be talking about the era epic. We're going to talk about Ezekiel, some themes in Ezekiel that are really, really cool, and I wanted to share with you guys. How are you doing today, Eli?
I'm doing well. Glad to be here, and thank you for your patience these last few months.
No worries, yeah. It's been in the process. We've been a while talking about this, and finally to get it done, so this is awesome.
Yes. All right. So I'm going to speak about Ezekiel and also about the era epic and what studying Mesopotamia may have to offer. I mean, if someone's interested in the Hebrew Bible, then what could studying ancient Mesopotamia offer for that person?
Awesome.
Even in
Could
ways
you,
that...
I was just gonna ask you, could you give everyone a little bit of an intro, tell us about yourself, like what you're studying?
Yeah, sure. I'm a fifth-year Assyriology PhD student. I write about the era epic, which is an ancient Akkadian poem that is very interesting and very puzzling, in some ways very confusing. And I'm originally from Israel, so I know biblical Hebrew. So despite being an avowed atheist, I'm a big fan of the Hebrew Bible and of reading it, and of Ezekiel included. Very, also kind of a strange book in many respects. And my dissertation concerns basically psychological themes in the era epic, but also it aims to go through the epic and offer my own take on issues of interpretation in the epic. And I call it the era epic. Most of the time it's called era in Ishum these days. Ishum is the other god who figures in the epic, or even Cynthia Taylor, who wrote the only dissertation so far written on the era epic, called it the era song, which is a lovely name. I call it the era epic because that's the name I think I first learned about it as the era epic, and I kind of just kept going. Maybe I should change it. In my mind, it's less the era epic, more just era. And in antiquity, it was known either by its incipit, the beginning, that is, like in, biblical books in Hebrew are known by the first words or one of the first words. And the era epic, its incipit was king of all inhabited regions, which sounds better in Akkadian. In Assyriological English, it doesn't sound that good. But I work on that, and I think it's really fun. I think Assyriology is the most fun thing in the world, and there's no other reason to do it, because it's not exactly the secure path to fame, riches, or financial stability of any kind. What should we start with? Ezekiel, not Ezekiel? Era, not era?
Can you hear me?
I can hear you, but you kind of froze again.
Okay. All right. That's no worries. All right. Yeah. So let's talk about let's just go ahead and just what interesting things about Ezekiel have you studied?
So what interested me when I first... You're still frozen, by the way.
Don't worry about it.
Don't worry. Okay. What I studied about Ezekiel is mostly its possible Mesopotamian connections, and I think Ezekiel offers an interesting case.
I'm still here.
Yeah, you're still here. So for a lot of the biblical books, we're not entirely sure where the authors were, what they wrote when they wrote it. But with Ezekiel, we do have a better idea, because he, by his own admission, was in Babylonia. I think I can actually load my screen now. Let's share screen. Windows, slideshow, share. Okay, do you see the slideshow?
Let me see. I think I gotta make it available on the screen.
Okay.
Yep, there you go.
Okay, I'll just talk then. All right, so this is Ezekiel on the Sistine Chapel ceiling. He looks rather maybe confused, distracted, unhappy. That would be very much like him. He wasn't a very happy prophet. This is a city that some of you might know. This is Tel Aviv. And Tel Aviv is a city with a funny name. It comes from Ezekiel. And in Ezekiel 15, he says, Va'avo la gola Tel Aviv hayoshvim nar kvar. And I came to the exiles at Tel Aviv who lived by the river Kvar. And this is a settlement in Babylonia. And in Hebrew, Tel Aviv, Tel, I think it's a word that comes from Akkadian, it means ruin mound. And Aviv means spring. So in Hebrew, it means something like, it appears to mean something like mound spring. It's just, and then it's this kind of hopeful thing, the mound becoming flowering with spring and renewal. And when Theodor Herzl wrote his book about, he called it the Judenstaat, the Jewish state, the book that kind of heralded Zionism, the Hebrew translation of it is called Tel Aviv, because Judaism or the Jewish people will rise from the Tel, from the ruins, and they will flower like springtime. But in fact, the name Tel Aviv does not mean that at all, because it's an Akkadian term that means Til Abubi, mound of the flood mound, which we think refers to what the Babylonians thought was a mound left behind by the primordial flood. So it actually has nothing to do with spring, and Aviv is not spring, it's actually flood. But that kind of got lost in time, and that's a thing we're going to see in Ezekiel, is that Ezekiel, by his own admission, lived in a certain cultural context. And I think Ezekiel offers a very, especially for people who are believers, offers an interesting case in the use of Assyriology, because a lot of the time when scholars propose that Assyriology be used in regards to biblical text, the basic idea is, the biblical authors stole or borrowed from other myths, and that of course undercuts the originality of the Bible and also the reality of what it describes. But in Ezekiel, this tension between what Assyriology has to say and one's belief in the text is not actually the main issue, because Ezekiel, what Assyriology can do for Ezekiel can work for both Assyriologists and for, to be honest, biblical literalists, because knowing Akkadian, knowing Assyriology can help us understand the text better, not on Assyriology's terms, but on its own terms.
Wow.
Because Ezekiel was in Babylonia, and he was speaking by his own admission, he says this is where he is. And he never says, for example, when he says Tel Aviv, he never means Aviv means spring. He just gives a name. And we had one idea of what the name is, but now with Akkadian, we know what the name actually was. And that doesn't contradict Ezekiel's text at all. Rather, it just helps us understand better the place where he lived, which we now know was named Flood Mound, not Mound of Spring or whatever. So in this case, we have basically even Assyriology and any kind of belief in the Bible, they can work together, actually. So one's atheism or belief doesn't have to factor into this. In this case, particular case, maybe that is not so true, but in most cases, in the case I'm going to talk about, in most cases in this slideshow, it doesn't. One's belief or disbelief does not have much to do with what Assyriology has to offer to Ezekiel. Okay, this is the vision of the chariot. What should I read from this? I'll read a bit. In the 13th year, in the 4th month, on the 5th day of the month, as I was among the exiles by the river Chbal, the heavens were opened, and I saw visions of God. On the 5th day of the month, it was the 5th year of the exile of King Yoachin, the word of the Lord came to the priest Ezekiel, son of Buzi, in the land of the Chaldeans by the river Kvar. And the hand of the Lord was on him there. And then he goes on to describe this divine revelation. And where is it? Here we go. This is the important bit. So he describes famously the four beasts, the four angels, whose nature is unclear. He was a very his imagery is very wild. I mean, even in Isaiah's vision in Isaiah 6, there's still something human about the seraphs, but here there's something more fantastical. And then he says, above the expanse that was over their heads, and the word for expanse here is rakia, which means something that is hammered, or kind of a plane or sky, really. Above the expanse that was over their heads was the figure of a throne with the appearance of sapphire stone. The word, the word, that's actually a common misconception. Not really misconception. The stone in the Bible that people translate as sapphire is not actually what we call sapphire. It's lapis lazuli, that the Babylonians really liked, and the Judeans really liked as well. So it's not actual sapphire. And above, on the figure of a throne, was a figure with the appearance of a human being. From the appearance of his loins upward, I saw the like of chashmal, having something with the appearance of fire surrounding it. And from the appearance of his loins downward, I saw something with the appearance of fire. And he was surrounded by radiance. Like the appearance of the bow that is in a cloud on a rainy day, such was the appearance of the surrounding radiance. That was the appearance of the figure of the majesty of Yahweh. When I saw it, I fell on my face. All right, so we have this vision of God, and you notice he says appearance. He makes it clear that what he is seeing is not, in fact, may not be what actually exists. So there's a gap between his perception and God's nature. And I think that's an important point, and it's in the text. He really says the appearance, or something like. He's not quite sure what he's seeing, and maybe what he's seeing, he's meaning to say that what he's seeing is not what actually exists. God is not literally like this, which is very interesting, actually. So we have this word chashmal. From the appearance of his loins upward, I saw the like of chashmal. The word chashmal in modern Hebrew means electricity. I'll get to why. And the word chashmal is mysterious. It's a hapax legomenon, which means it only appears once in the biblical text. And in the Talmud, basically the exact nature of chashmal was very mysterious. And in the Talmud, there's a story. Basically, the sages taught an incident occurring involving a youth who was reading the book of Ezekiel in the house of his teacher. And he was able to comprehend chashmal. It kind of spoils the point by calling it electrum, but okay. And fire came out of the electrum and burned him. And they sought to suppress the book of Ezekiel due to the danger it posed. So, the chashmal is mysterious. People across Jewish sages across the millennia have interpreted it in different ways. But basically, there is this idea that chashmal, via metathesis. Metathesis is when you have letters and you move them around and you change their order. Actually derived from the Akkadian word el meshu, which is amber in all likelihood. And it's not a coincidence that chashmal means electricity, because amber produces static electricity, as the Greeks knew. So this isn't, Assyriology didn't come up with the idea that chashmal is amber, or electrum for that matter, but that it derived from the Akkadian term el meshu. There are people who dispute that, and I'm not entirely convinced of it myself. But to be honest, it does not matter that much. If one assumes, however, that chashmal is indeed amber or electrum, it leads to some interesting places. This is a Babylonian text about the nature of the universe. It's about the heavens. This is from
Hey, Eli.
Yes.
I wanted to ask you, could you talk a little bit more about what is a cognate, and
Oh yeah, sure.
How do they know that? I mean, you said I could see how they might sound similar, but at the same time, it's not the same word. So
no. It's not the same. I think one thing that should be noted is that a lot of words that in Akkadian have an e sound have a ch in Hebrew, and that is the case also with cognates. I'll get to cognates later that are much clearer. I'm not entirely convinced of this, by the way. I think scholars have proposed this, and it sounds neat, but it's not close enough that I can really say I'm convinced of this. In this case, I'm the messenger more than a believer in this.
Okay.
But these are the same consonants. That is important. If we equate the e with the ch, so we have ch, le, m, sh, and le and ch, sh, m, le. These are the same consonants. I don't think it's outlandish to think they're related. There is the Hebrew word chalamish, which is a different type of stone, which is, I think, must be derived from, it must be related to el-meshu. But this is basically an idea that's based on the supposition that chashmal does mean amber, as opposed to some different mystical substance. And two, that it is the cognate, even if it's not a word from Akkadian, that it means the same thing as el-meshu. As for the question, if one actually believes that, I think it is likely. I'm not entirely convinced. But the idea that chashmal is amber is a very old one, and it's nothing to do with Assyriology necessarily or Akkadian. Does that make more sense?
Yeah. So you're saying, what are you saying? Well, actually, maybe are you saying because in that other text, the Jewish text, that it was kind of used like amber, that's why?
No, but it's kind of this old. It is an old tradition. I'm not sure what it's. Might have been even in the Septuagint. It might have been translated as electrum. So the knowledge was never really lost.
I see.
Let's actually see what it was translated as. 1 second. Okay, that's not helpful. That's definitely not it. Yeah, electron, amber. So even as a Septuagint, it means amber.
Okay.
So it's an old idea. So one does not have to accept or not accept what I'm going to say. One doesn't have to suppose that chashmal comes from el-meshu. One just has to suppose that chashmal means amber, and Assyriologists, for their own reasons, have arrived at the conclusion that el-meshu means amber as well.
Gotcha.
Okay, that's an important point. So we have this Akkadian text. So it's about the nature of the universe. I think this is from the 7th century BC, which is about a century, maybe a bit less, before Ezekiel's time. The upper heaven of, and then we have names of stones. The Assyriological thing, we don't know what Lulu Danitu stone is, so we just write it like this. The upper heaven of Lulu Danitu stone belongs to Anum, that's a sky god. 300 Igigi dwell in it. The middle heaven of his Sagilmud stone belongs to the Igigi. The Lord Marduk is in the Holy of Holies. The Akkadian doesn't quite say Holy of Holies, that's a bit of a stretch. And basically in the sanctum. He took a seat on a lapis lazuli throne. In it he lit a lamp made of amber stone. In the lower heavens of jasper, upon which was marked are the Lumashi stars of the gods. Okay, so this is a diagram of the universe as described in this text. You have the upper heaven with, is it 30? 300. Yes, 300 Igigi or 30, maybe they interpreted it differently. Then we have the middle heaven. This is a terrible, the article from which this comes is good, but this is a bit amateurish. So we have the middle heavens, and then we have Bel himself and the little lamp. And then we have the lower heavens on which the stars are found. So we have upper heaven, middle heaven with Bel and a lamp made of amber, and the lower heaven. And then we have another kind of place where the amber appears. It's from an Assyrian prophecy. The Assyrians had prophets. I, Ishtar, have established your throne, that is the king's throne, the Assyrian king's throne, under the great heaven. I watch over you from a golden abode in the midst of the heaven. That is also not good English, but okay. I light the lamp of amber before Esarhaddon, the king of Ashur. Nur Sha'el Meshi. So we have amber associated with light. Let's see. Okay. So we have this vision. Talked a lot today, so I'm coughing. We have this vision of Bel, the Mesopotamian king of the gods, with a light of amber, above him another heaven, and below him is the other heaven. And scholars have proposed that this matches the vision in Ezekiel. So there's an expanse, a heaven over the heads of the angels, and upon it there is God, and there is Chashmal, the El Meshu around, which would fit the El Meshu, and it would be related to light, to fire. So basically we have the same sequence of basically sky, God with amber light, and then in this case there isn't a heaven above him. But the main similarity is heaven on them is a God, and the God is associated with the light of an El Meshu, of amber. So is it convincing? I would say it's interesting. Well, I would say it is interesting. What do you think? Do you think this is convincing at all, or not so much?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely an interesting parallel there. And of course, Ezekiel, I mean, there's a good chance he might be familiar with something like this.
Yeah, there is a good chance that he would be. So we have the same kind of thing, God on the heavens. Oh, and sitting on a lapis lazuli throne. I forgot about that. That's also a thing.
Mm.
God also sits. Where's the throne? Yeah, the figure of a throne, the appearance of lapis lazuli. So God sits on a lapis lazuli throne, and so does Bel. He took a seat on a lapis lazuli throne. So we have a lapis lazuli throne, a light of amber above the sky. So it is similar. Does it mean Ezekiel drew on this? I guess maybe. These are kind of these. It's hard to know in this case. A lapis lazuli throne, for instance. I mean, that doesn't have to be borrowed from Babylonians. They loved lapis lazuli, and you could have come up with a lapis lazuli throne in any case. But it is an intriguing similarity. After all, I used to be more convinced of this when I gave the Digital Hammurabi talk.
Well, what made you change your mind a little bit?
I don't know. The whole judgment of similarities is so subjective. It's just about how you feel on a given day. And it's really hard. I mean, sometimes you think you see direct borrowing, and sometimes it's just, this looks vaguely similar to that. So could be borrowing, could be drawing on common elements.
Yeah. Maybe like how you write a text like this, like a genre almost. What do you think about that?
Yeah, it could be a genre thing. But it does reflect a Babylonian world, or maybe shared motifs between the Jewish and Babylonian worlds. The sky, the amber, the light, the throne. These are the same motifs. And that is very interesting in itself. And that Ezekiel was familiar with with Babylonian stuff, or the stuff Ezekiel is describing is similar to Babylonian stuff, is also suggested by the next thing. So, and then there's a line, that was the appearance of the figure of the majesty, Kvod Adonai, the majesty of Yahweh. When I saw it, I fell on my face. This Kvod Adonai, this majesty or honor or of God, might be similar to a thing called the Melamu. So, first of all, we have this thing, where is the rainbow? Yes, like the appearance of the bow that is in a cloud on a rainy day, such was the appearance of the surrounding radiance. That was the appearance of the figure of the majesty of Yahweh. So in the Mesopotamian world, the gods were surrounded by this light, by this terrifying radiance that was called the Melamu. It comes from Sumerian. And this was the radiance of the gods, the light, the blinding light that cannot be withstood that surrounded the gods. Here we have a visual representation of this. This is from an Assyrian reproduction of an Assyrian relief. We have the god Ashur or Shamash, the sun god, and we have this around him, and you see it's in many colors. And Ezekiel speaks of the radiance being like a rainbow, and this resembles this multicolored thing. But what is interesting is that the reaction Ezekiel has to seeing the Kvod Adonai, the majesty of Yahweh, is falling on his face. He is terrified. And here we have some examples of the Melamu. He, Anu, made her bear awe-inspiring sheen and heroism. Fire garbed in sheen. And Marduk is said to be clad in the splendor of 10 gods. And the reaction people have to the Melamu, a Melamu overwhelms. And sometimes even a Melamu makes people fall on their face, basically, exactly like Ezekiel does. For example, this is from a great text called the Assyrian Underworld Vision. In it, an Assyrian prince has a vision of the underworld. Basically, it's interesting because there's a long tradition in Christian writing, especially only Catholic writing, about voyages through hell. I mean, the best example of this is, of course, Dante. And this is very much in the same vein, in a sense. And then this prince, this Kumaya, insults Ereshkigal, the queen of the underworld, in some way. And he is pulled, basically in a vision, or in a sense, he's really pulled to the underworld. And he is summoned to appear before Nergal, Ereshkigal's very angry husband. And then he says, this prince, when I raised my eyes, so they say I saw, but really the text says, when I raised my eyes, Nergal! Basically, immediately when he raised his eyes, he saw the valiant Nergal seated on a regal throne, apparelled with a royal tiara. With both hands he grasped 2 grim maces, each with 2 heads. Lightning, very, very frightening, as they say. The netherworld was full of terror. A mighty silence lay before the crowned prince. I looked at him, the prince says, and my bones shivered. His grimly luminescent splendor, that is his Melamu, and that's what's highlighted here in the Akkadian. So overwhelmed me, I kissed the feet of his great divinity and knelt down. So in the same way that Ezekiel beholds the majesty of Yahweh and falls on his face, the majesty of Yahweh that is associated with light, in the same way, when this prince beholds the light-filled radiance, the Melamu of the Mesopotamian god, he also falls on his face. So there's a similarity here in how you conceptualize divinity, and that's not only a Greek or a Mesopotamian or biblical thing. In Greek mythology as well, the gods in their actual form were impossibly radiant. You couldn't look upon them. There's a story about Semele and Zeus, that Zeus was having an affair, as he always was, with a mortal named Semele, and she became pregnant with Dionysus. And Hera tricked her. She told her, how are you sure the man with whom you are sleeping is Zeus himself? Tell him to reveal himself. And Zeus agrees, and he reveals himself, and she disintegrates. She is overwhelmed. She explodes, basically, because she sees him in his natural, radiant form. So the idea that gods are connected with light is, I think, every culture has that, basically, because light is the ultimate expression of power and goodness, in a sense. But the idea that the gods are surrounded by radiance, and that radiance can be multicolored, in that when one looks upon this radiance, one kneels or falls down on his face, is shared among these 2 texts. And at least says that they had, the Mesopotamians and Ezekiel in this case, had a similar conception of what God looks like, in a sense, or how terrible it is to look upon him. Does it make sense?
Yeah, no, that's very, very fascinating. I'm a little interested. You said the Greek text has the same idea of this Melamu type thing.
In a sense, gods emit light. They're like stars.
Yeah.
In Mesopotamia, the gods are stars.
So I don't know though, because obviously a lot of Greek themes come from Mesopotamian myths.
I don't know if I buy that.
You don't buy that?
No, I don't buy that. I don't buy the Martin West thing.
Oh,
I
really? Okay.
No, look, as it's maybe it's against my own interests because it's in the interest of theology to say that everything came from Mesopotamia. I think there's sometimes this Babylomania.
Yeah.
And we all debate, even in biblical studies, the Babel und Bibel debates, the Babel and Babylon debates. You had these German scholars who, in many cases, were extremely anti-Semitic, who wanted to say that everything in the Hebrew Bible was basically Babylonian, and therefore, and still, that is still when you read Richard Dawkins' book, whenever he mentions the Bible or any other new atheism thing, it's always, it's all like, it's a common trope among atheists that everything in the Bible, nothing is original, it's all
Yeah.
borrowed, or in our culture, especially now, borrowing is a negative thing. When you borrow something from another culture, you appropriate it, you're doing something bad. So the view that the biblical stories are kind of inferior, recycled versions of other stories, except in certain cases. I think the flood story is a bit too similar to be not derived from the Babylonian version, or at least very similar. It's the same story, whichever direction it flowed. But in a lot of cases, there is so much that is original about the Bible that people discount. And the same goes for Greece. First, it's kind of like, there was first a tendency to say, oh, the Greeks invented everything. And everything that is good about Western civilization that doesn't come from Christianity, the Greeks did. And they were kind of the Greek miracle. They were kind of, it came from nowhere. And then there's it's always a dialectic. So that's a thesis, and the antithesis is or the contrary thesis that, the Greeks just took from the Babylonians or the Egyptians or both. And Homer read Gilgamesh, and the Greek gods are really Mesopotamian gods, and Aphrodite is Ishtar. I don't buy that. I think that's too much. I think also if you just look at Babylonian sources looking for parallels to biblical or Greek sources, you're not really reading Babylonian sources. You're just, what I think the most interesting thing. Of course, it is, of course, interesting to look at biblical parallels, but it's also interesting to just read Babylonian sources as themselves. There was this scholar named Landsberger who talked about what he called the Eigenbegrifflichkeit, the own concept. If I would translate it to English, it would be something like own conceptness of Mesopotamia. That you don't have to. You can study it on its own terms, and it's so interesting. So, I think if I'm not mistaken, also in the Vedas and other sources as well, gods are associated with light. There's nothing more divine than light. It's life-giving and also unbearable. So it's perfect representation of the divinity, something that is powerful, but that is also just overwhelming. So this is the thing with the Melamu, with the light. Now we have the other things. Basically, how can Akkadian help us understand the biblical, the text of Ezekiel better? And now we have the beautiful, I think it's 26, 27. What's this? I think it's Ezekiel 26.
Are you, just to be clear, are you going to a different part
of Ezekiel? Yes.
Like a different section, or did you have more on the Melamu and?
No, this is
okay.
On the Melamu.
Okay, because I did want to talk about what your not necessarily your dissertation like specifically, but like the era epic and. Yeah, so it'd be cool if you think this is a good stopping point, then we can move on to that. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Hello, everybody. This was part 1 of interview with Eli Tadmor on the Babylonian influence of Ezekiel. You make sure to check out the next one where we talk about the era epic and the interesting similarities it has with the Bible and the flood and the sons of God.